The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that made people pull their blankets tighter and stay indoors. But for 5-year-old Ethan Thompson, it would become a night he could never forget, though most of what happened would remain blurry in his memory. His small suburban home, nestled at the end of a quiet street, seemed ordinary from the outside. Inside, however, chaos was about to erupt. Ethan had been sleeping soundly in his room when he woke up to the smell of smoke. At first, he thought it was just the lingering scent of dinner, but then he heard shouting. His mother's voice pierced through the darkness, sharp and panicked. "Get out! Everyone get out!" she screamed. Confused and scared, Ethan grabbed his favorite stuffed bear, the one his dad had given him on his birthday, and ran toward the door. The hallway was already filled with thick black smoke, making it hard to see or breathe. He stumbled forward, calling out for his sister Lily, who always teased him, but secretly let him tag along wherever she went. No answer came. Then he heard his father yelling from downstairs, telling everyone to head for the front door. But before Ethan could reach the stairs, flames roared to life behind him, blocking his path. Terrified, he turned back toward his bedroom window, coughing violently as the smoke burned his throat. Summoning all his courage, he climbed onto the windowsill and jumped, landing awkwardly on the frosty grass below. Tears streamed down his face as he clutched his bear tightly, staring up at the house now engulfed in fire. Neighbors were rushing out of their homes, pointing flashlights and shouting for help. Someone wrapped a blanket around Ethan, but no one else came out of the burning house. Fire trucks arrived soon after, their sirens wailing like ghosts in the night. Firefighters worked tirelessly to put out the blaze, but by the time they managed to control the inferno, it was too late. Ethan's parents and Lily were gone, lost forever inside the collapsing structure. The boy sat silently on the curb, shivering not just from the cold but from shock. He didn't fully understand what had happened, only that his world had shattered in an instant. In the days that followed, investigators combed through the ruins, searching for answers. They talked about faulty wiring, accidental sparks, even arson, but nothing was certain. For Ethan, none of it mattered. All he knew was that his family was gone, leaving him alone in a world that suddenly felt impossibly large and empty. Relatives tried to comfort him, but grief hung heavy over every conversation. Eventually, social workers stepped in, placing him in foster care. As the years passed, Ethan grew into a quiet, introspective young man. Memories of that night remained fragmented. A flickering light here, a muffled shout there, but the pain stayed fresh. He often wondered if he'd missed something important, some clue that might explain why fate had spared him while taking everything else. Little did he know, decades later, a single photograph would arrive out of the blue, setting off a chain of events that would force him to confront the past he'd spent so long trying to escape. Life after the fire was anything but easy for Ethan. Moving from one foster home to another, he quickly learned how to adapt to new surroundings and unfamiliar faces. Some families were kind, offering him warmth and care, while others treated him more like a burden than a child in need. Despite the constant changes, Ethan carried his stuffed bear with him everywhere, a silent reminder of the family he'd lost and the innocence that had been taken too soon. School became his refuge. While other kids played games during recess, Ethan buried himself in books. Stories of faraway lands and brave heroes gave him a sense of escape, a way to imagine a life different from his own. He found comfort in drawing too, sketching pictures of what he remembered about his family. Sometimes he'd draw their house, the cozy living room where they used to gather on weekends, or the kitchen where his mom baked cookies, but the images always felt incomplete, as if pieces of his memory were missing. As he grew older, Ethan threw himself into academics, determined to prove that he could make something of his life despite the odds stacked against him. Teachers noticed his quiet determination and encouraged him to aim high. By the time he graduated high school, he had earned scholarships to attend college, a dream he never thought possible given his tumultuous childhood. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. College brought new challenges and opportunities. Living on campus meant independence, something Ethan craved but also feared. The dorms buzzed with laughter and late-night conversations, but Ethan often felt like an outsider looking in. He struggled to connect with others, unsure of how much to share about his past. When classmates talked about their families, he stayed silent, pretending not to hear. Still, he worked hard, earning top grades and impressing professors who saw potential in him. After graduation, Ethan moved to a small apartment in the city, working long hours at an entry-level job while pursuing freelance illustration on the side. Art had become his voice, a way to express emotions he couldn't put into words. His sketches told stories of resilience and loss, resonating with those who saw them. Slowly, he began building a reputation as a talented artist, though success didn't bring the fulfillment he'd expected. No matter how many accolades he received, there was always an emptiness inside, a hole no achievement could fill. Ethan tried dating once or twice, hoping to find companionship, but relationships never lasted long. People would ask about his family, and he'd deflect with vague answers or change the subject altogether. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? Nights were the hardest. Alone in his apartment, he'd stare at old drawings of his parents and sister, wondering if he'd ever truly heal. One day, while cleaning out a box of belongings stored by a distant relative, Ethan stumbled upon a faded photo album. Flipping through its pages, he paused at a picture of his family, smiling together outside their home. It was a moment frozen in time, untouched by tragedy. As he gazed at their faces, a lump formed in his throat. He realized how little he actually remembered about them. The sound of his dad's laugh, the way his mom hummed when she cooked, the jokes Lily used to tell. They were slipping away, fading like shadows at sunset. That realization weighed heavily on him. For years, he'd focused on moving forward, leaving the past behind. But now, standing alone in his tiny apartment surrounded by remnants of a life gone by, Ethan wondered if running from his memories had only made them stronger. Little did he know, fate had plans to force him to confront the very thing he'd spent 2 decades trying to forget. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Ethan's life took another unexpected turn. He had just finished breakfast and was about to leave for work when the doorbell rang. Surprised, he rarely received visitors. Ethan opened the door to find a small package waiting on his doorstep. There was no delivery person in sight, only the brown cardboard box sitting there as if it had been placed with deliberate care. Puzzled, he picked it up and brought it inside. The package was light, almost weightless, but something about it felt significant. His name and address were written neatly on the label in handwriting that looked vaguely familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. No return address was visible, which made him hesitate for a moment. Who would send him something like this? Curiosity got the better of him, and he carefully tore open the box. Inside, wrapped in layers of tissue paper, was a photograph. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, a family posing together outside their home. But as Ethan held it closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was his family. The image showed them standing in front of their house, smiling brightly under the golden afternoon sun. His dad had one arm around his mom's shoulders, while Lily stood beside them, making this silly face. And there he was, 5-year-old Ethan, clutching his beloved stuffed bear. The photo captured a moment of pure happiness, frozen in time before everything changed. Flipping the photograph over, Ethan noticed writing on the back. In delicate cursive, it read, "For Ethan, from Mom." His heart raced. How could this be? His mother had died in the fire 20 years ago, yet here was her handwriting, clear as day. Shaking, he set the photo aside and dug deeper into the box. Beneath it lay a folded letter. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper and began to read. The letter was short but filled with emotion. It explained that the photograph had been discovered among belongings stored by a distant relative who had recently passed away. This relative, a cousin of Ethan's mother, had kept mementos from the family without realizing their significance until now. The letter ended with words that sent chills down Ethan's spine. "There's more to know. Come home." Ethan sat motionless, staring at the letter as if it might disappear if he blinked. What did it mean? More to know about what? About the fire. About his family. Questions swirled in his mind, each one pulling him deeper into a whirlpool of uncertainty. For years, he'd tried to put the past behind him, focusing on building a new life. But now, this mysterious package forced him to confront memories he'd buried long ago. He glanced at the photograph again, studying every detail. The house looked exactly as he remembered it. The white picket fence, the flower beds his mom had lovingly tended, even the crack in the driveway where he used to trip as a child. Seeing it all so vividly brought both comfort and pain. Comfort because it reminded him of happier times. Pain because those times were gone forever. That evening, Ethan couldn't concentrate on anything else. Work felt meaningless, and even his art supplies gathered dust untouched. Instead, he spent hours staring at the photo, trying to piece together fragments of his childhood. Memories bubbled to the surface. His dad teaching him how to ride a bike, his mom reading bedtime stories, Lily braiding his hair when he fell asleep on the couch. They were fleeting images, fragile and fragmented, but they felt real. As night fell, Ethan finally made a decision. Whatever secrets this letter hinted at, he needed to uncover them. If coming home meant finding answers, then he owed it to himself and to his family to go back. Little did he know, returning to the place where it all began would lead him down a path far more complicated than he ever imagined. Returning to the town where he grew up felt surreal, like stepping into a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The familiar streets that once held laughter and warmth now seemed foreign, tinged with sadness and loss. Ethan drove slowly, taking in the changes time had brought. New shops lined the main road, and some old houses had been replaced by modern buildings. Yet the essence of the place remained unchanged, a quiet suburb frozen in its own history. His first stop was the lot where his family's house once stood. It wasn't hard to find. It sat at the end of the street, overgrown with weeds, and marked only by a rusted "for sale" sign, leaning crookedly against a fence post. Ethan parked his car and stepped out, his heart pounding as he approached the empty space. The charred remnants of the foundation were still visible beneath layers of dirt and debris, a grim reminder of the fire that had taken everything from him. Standing there, Ethan felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: grief, anger, and something else he couldn't quite name. He knelt down, running his fingers through the soil as if trying to touch the past. Memories flooded back, fragmented and hazy, but powerful enough to make his chest tighten. He remembered the sound of his sister's laugh echoing through the yard, the way his dad always joked about mowing the lawn, and the smell of fresh paint when they'd renovated the kitchen just weeks before the tragedy. These small moments felt so vivid now, yet painfully out of reach. As Ethan lingered, a neighbor emerged from a nearby house. Mrs. Harper, an elderly woman who had lived across the street for decades, recognized him immediately. Her eyes softened with sympathy as she walked over, clutching the shawl around her shoulders. "Ethan," she asked gently, "is that you?" He nodded, unsure of what to say. She smiled sadly and placed a hand on his arm. "You've grown so much. I heard you were coming back. How are you holding up?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years, not genuinely, anyway. Ethan shrugged, struggling to find words. Before he could respond, Mrs. Harper sighed and shook her head. "It's been too long since anyone talked about what happened here," she said. "People try to move on, but, well, not everyone believes the fire was just an accident." Ethan froze. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Harper hesitated, glancing around as though afraid someone might overhear. Then, lowering her voice, she continued, "I saw lights near your house that night, strange ones, flickering in the darkness. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the flames, but later I wondered. She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Wondered what? Ethan pressed, his curiosity and unease growing. She looked at him directly, her expression serious. Some folks around here whispered about foul play. Your dad had been arguing with someone about money before the fire. A contractor, I think. But no one could prove anything, and after a while, people stopped asking questions. The information hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. His father had never mentioned any arguments, at least not to him. Could there have been more to the fire than anyone realized? As Mrs. Harper patted his arm and excused herself, promising to check in on him later, Ethan stood rooted to the spot, staring at the barren lot. The idea that the fire might not have been an accident gnawed at him, refusing to let go. Determined to learn more, Ethan spent the rest of the day visiting other neighbors. Some avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable discussing the past, while others shared fragments of stories they'd heard or suspicions they'd harbored. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle, painting a picture far darker than Ethan had imagined. By the time night fell, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but sleep felt impossible. The quiet suburban town, once a sanctuary of happy memories, now felt like a web of secrets waiting to be unraveled. And Ethan knew he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. The next morning, Ethan headed to the local library, determined to dig deeper into the mystery surrounding his family's tragedy. The building smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, a comforting scent that momentarily eased his nerves. He approached the librarian, a kind woman with glasses perched on her nose, and explained what he was looking for: newspaper clippings and records about the fire that destroyed his childhood home. The librarian nodded sympathetically and led him to a corner of the library where dusty archives were stored. There, Ethan began sifting through yellowed newspapers, their pages brittle with age. It didn't take long to find articles about the fire. Headlines screamed words like "Tragedy Strikes Suburb" and "Family Perishes in Mysterious Blaze." Most of the stories focused on the human toll, the loss of life. But one article caught his attention. Beneath the main headline was a smaller subheading: "Arson Suspected, Investigation Ongoing." Ethan's hands trembled as he read further. According to the report, investigators had found traces of accelerants at the scene, suggesting the fire might have been deliberately set. However, without concrete evidence or witnesses, the case remained unsolved. The article also mentioned disputes between Ethan's father and a contractor over unpaid bills related to renovations done on the house. A name jumped out at him: Victor Kane. The name stirred something in Ethan's memory. He vaguely recalled hearing it before, though he couldn't pinpoint when or where. Determined to learn more, he searched through property records and business filings, piecing together details about Victor Kane. From what he gathered, Kane was a local handyman known for cutting corners and pressuring clients into paying exorbitant fees. Several complaints had been filed against him over the years, but nothing stuck. One document even hinted at shady dealings involving insurance fraud. By late afternoon, Ethan felt overwhelmed yet driven. Armed with this new information, he decided to track down Victor Kane himself. After some sleuthing online, he discovered that Kane still lived in the area, running a small repair shop on the outskirts of town. With nothing but determination fueling him, Ethan drove to the address listed. The shop was tucked away behind a row of warehouses, its sign faded and barely legible. Inside, tools lay scattered across workbenches, and the air smelled of oil and sawdust. Victor Kane stood hunched over a project, his graying hair sticking out from under a baseball cap. When Ethan introduced himself, Kane froze, his face draining of color. I don't know anything," Kane stammered, avoiding eye contact. But Ethan wasn't letting him off that easily. He showed Kane the photograph of his family and the article mentioning their dispute. "You worked on my parents' house," Ethan said firmly. What really happened that night? For a moment, Kane looked like he might bolt, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Look, kid, "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," he muttered, his voice trembling. "I went there to scare your dad, make him pay up. Things got out of hand. I swear I didn't start the fire on purpose." Ethan's stomach churned as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. While Kane hadn't admitted outright guilt, his reaction confirmed Ethan's worst fears. The fire hadn't been an accident. Someone had tampered with his family's home, setting events in motion that ended in unimaginable tragedy. As he left the shop, Ethan's mind raced. Justice had eluded his family for 20 years, but now, armed with the truth, he vowed to ensure it wouldn't stay buried forever. Back at his hotel room that night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The weight of Victor Kane's confession, or partial confession, pressed heavily on his mind. He replayed their conversation over and over, trying to make sense of it. If Kane hadn't meant to start the fire, then what exactly had happened? And why had no one investigated further after the tragedy? Frustrated but determined, Ethan knew he needed more answers. The next morning, he returned to the storage box containing belongings left behind by his distant relatives. There had to be something else hidden among those items, something that could shed light on the truth. As he sorted through old photo albums, letters, and miscellaneous keepsakes, his fingers brushed against a small metal object buried beneath a stack of papers. Pulling it out, he discovered a rusted key attached to a tag labeled "Attic Safe." His heart skipped a beat. A safe? In the attic? Why hadn't anyone mentioned this before? Ethan immediately drove back to the empty lot where his family's house once stood. Standing there now, staring at the charred foundation, he felt a surge of determination. If the safe was still intact, it might hold evidence that could finally bring closure to the mystery. Equipped with gloves and a flashlight, Ethan began digging through the debris that remained in what used to be the attic. Hours passed as he sifted through ash, broken wood, and twisted metal. Just when he started to lose hope, his shovel struck something solid. Dropping to his knees, he cleared away layers of dirt and soot until a rectangular shape emerged, a steel safe, blackened by smoke but surprisingly undamaged. It took several attempts to pry it open using the rusted key, but eventually the lock clicked and the door creaked open. Inside, Ethan found a collection of documents wrapped carefully in plastic bags for protection. Among them were letters written by his mother. With trembling hands, he unfolded one dated just weeks before the fire. In her neat handwriting, she expressed fears about Victor Kane, describing how he'd become increasingly aggressive about payment and even threatened legal action. She wrote about feeling unsafe, urging Ethan's father to report him to authorities. But they never did. There was also another photograph, this one showing Victor Kane arguing heatedly with Ethan's father near the driveway. The image sent chills down his spine. It was proof of the tension between them, captured unintentionally by someone who must have been passing by. On the back of the photo, his mother had scribbled, "Victor again. This needs to stop." Ethan sat back on his heels, overwhelmed by the implications. His parents hadn't just been dealing with financial stress. They'd been living under a cloud of fear. Someone like Victor Kane, desperate and reckless, could easily spiral into dangerous behavior. For the first time, Ethan understood the full scope of what had led up to that fateful night. It wasn't just an accident or bad luck. It was negligence, greed, and unchecked anger colliding in the worst possible way. As dusk fell, Ethan packed the documents and photos back into the safe, resolving to take them to the police. But deep down, he knew the journey wasn't just about seeking justice anymore. It was about honoring his family's memory by uncovering the truth they'd been denied. Each letter, each photograph, told a story of love, resilience, and ultimately, loss. And though the scars of the past would always remain, Ethan realized that facing them head-on was the only way to heal. The next day, Ethan returned to Victor Kane's repair shop, this time armed with the evidence he'd uncovered. The weight of the safe's contents gave him a strange sense of power. Finally, he had proof that could hold Kane accountable for his role in the tragedy. As he stepped inside the dimly lit workshop, Kane looked up from his workbench, his face pale and drawn. It was clear he hadn't expected Ethan to come back so soon. "I brought something you need to see," Ethan said firmly, placing the photograph of Kane arguing with his father on the cluttered table. Kane's eyes widened as he stared at the image, his hands trembling slightly. "You recognize this, don't you? This is you threatening my dad just days before the fire." Kane opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan cut him off. He pulled out the letters written by his mother, laying them beside the photo. "These are from my mom. She wrote about how scared she was of you, how you kept pressuring my dad over money. You even threatened him." Ethan's voice shook with anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. "So tell me, Victor, what exactly happened that night?" For a long moment, Kane said nothing. His gaze darted between the photo, the letters, and Ethan's unwavering stare. Finally, he sank into a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I didn't mean for anyone to die," he whispered. "I swear I didn't." He went on to explain that he'd gone to the house that night intending to intimidate Ethan's father into paying what he owed. "I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I saw the renovation materials we'd left in the garage and thought, maybe if I started a small fire, just enough to scare him." Kane trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Tears streamed down his face as he recounted how the flames spread faster than he anticipated, engulfing the house within minutes. Panicked, he fled the scene without calling for help, leaving Ethan's family trapped inside. Ethan listened in stunned silence, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Part of him wanted to lash out, to scream or hit something, but another part felt hollow, as though all the anger and grief had drained away, leaving only emptiness behind. "Do you have any idea what you took from me?" he asked quietly, his voice cracking. "My parents, my sister, they were everything to me, and you destroyed them because of money." Kane nodded miserably, unable to meet Ethan's eyes. "I've lived with this guilt every day since," he admitted, "but saying sorry doesn't change anything. Nothing can bring them back." Ethan knew he was right. No apology could undo the pain of losing his family or erase the years he'd spent searching for answers. Still, hearing Kane confess the truth brought a strange kind of closure. For 2 decades, he'd wondered why fate had singled him out to survive. Now, he understood it wasn't fate, it was human error, greed, and recklessness that had stolen his loved ones from him. After leaving the shop, Ethan went straight to the police station. He handed over the evidence, the photograph, the letters, and Kane's confession, and explained everything he'd learned. The officers promised to reopen the case, assuring him they would pursue charges against Kane for his involvement in the fire. Though justice might take time, Ethan felt a burden lifting from his shoulders. Knowing the truth and sharing it with the world was its own form of peace. That evening, as he drove back to his hotel, Ethan realized something important. While he couldn't change the past, he could decide how to move forward. The fire had taken so much from him, but it hadn't taken his strength, his resilience, or his ability to honor his family's memory. And that realization gave him hope. For the first time in 20 years, he felt ready to truly live again. In the weeks that followed, Ethan made a decision that surprised even himself. He would rebuild his family's home on the same lot where it once stood. It wasn't an easy choice. Every time he visited the site, memories of the fire and the life he'd lost came rushing back. But he knew it was the right thing to do. This wasn't just about creating a new house. It was about honoring the people who had filled the old one with love and laughter. He wanted to build something meaningful, something that would stand as a testament to their lives and his own resilience. Construction began slowly, with Ethan overseeing every detail. He worked closely with architects and builders, ensuring the design stayed true to the original structure while incorporating modern touches. The white picket fence returned, along with flower beds like the ones his mom used to tend. Inside, he recreated spaces that held special meaning. The cozy living room where they'd gathered for movie nights, the kitchen island where his dad taught him how to make pancakes, and the small nook by the window where Lily always read her favorite books. Each corner of the house became a tribute to the family he missed so deeply. As the project progressed, Ethan found himself reconnecting with people from his past. Neighbors stopped by to offer support, sharing stories about his parents and sister that brought both tears and smiles. One day, Mrs. Harper arrived with a box of mementos she'd saved over the years, old birthday cards, school projects, and even a bracelet Lily had once left at her house. "I thought you might want these," she said softly, placing the box in his hands. Ethan thanked her, overwhelmed by her kindness and the tangible connection to his family she'd preserved. Among the visitors was Sarah, a childhood friend Ethan hadn't seen since middle school. She remembered him tagging along with Lily and often teased them both. At first, their conversations were awkward, but as they spent more time together, they rekindled their friendship. Sarah listened patiently as Ethan talked about his journey, the grief, the unanswered questions, and finally, the truth he'd uncovered. Her presence brought lightness to his days, helping him see that life could still hold joy despite its hardships. When the house was finally finished, Ethan hosted a small gathering to celebrate. Friends, neighbors, and distant relatives came together, filling the space with warmth and laughter. Standing in the doorway, Ethan looked around at the faces of those who had supported him through everything. For the first time in years, he felt surrounded by community, not loneliness. But the house didn't feel complete until Ethan adopted a dog from a local shelter. The golden retriever, whom he named Max, quickly became his constant companion. Max's playful energy filled the quiet rooms, chasing away the ghosts of the past. Together, they explored every inch of the property, planting new trees and tending to the garden. Slowly, the charred lot transformed into a place of life and renewal. Though the pain of losing his family would never fully disappear, Ethan learned to carry it differently. Instead of letting grief define him, he chose to let it remind him of the love he'd been given. Every morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of the rebuilt home, he whispered a silent thank you to his parents and sister. They were gone, but their legacy lived on. In the walls of the house, in the flowers blooming outside, and in the heart of the man who refused to let their memory fade. Ethan realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering in a way that allowed him to move forward. And as he stood on the porch one evening, watching Max chase fireflies in the yard, he felt a profound sense of peace. The ashes of his past had given rise to something beautiful, hope.